have no doubt that you are a scoundrel, Higgins. But you're certainly not the type who would shoot an unarmed man.
Well, that is purely a personal opinion on your part.
By the mid-1960s, America's love affair with the Old West was everywhere. TV schedules were packed with shows like Bonanza and Gunsmoke. John Wayne was still a box office John. Even Disney had gotten in on the action years earlier with Davy Crockett and Westward Ho! The Wagons. The frontier, whether it was cowboys, mountain men, or gold prospectors, was one of Hollywood's most reliable playgrounds. It wasn't just the box office either. Western imagery was seeping into toys, lunchboxes, and even Disney theme parks with Frontierland, which let kids imagine themselves on the dusty trails of the gold rush. It was a cultural wave that seemed unstoppable, cementing itself in American nostalgia even as new genres were waiting in the wings. But by 1967, that gold rush boom was starting to wind down. Audiences were shifting. The spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone were redefining the genre with grit and violence, while younger viewers were flocking to spy thrillers and space adventures. The old-fashioned family western was on the decline, but Disney wasn't quite ready to hang up its spurs. Instead, they took a character who couldn't be further from a gunslinger, a prim and proper English butler, and dropped him right in the middle of a slapstick frontier comedy. It was a fish-out-of-water formula Disney had experimented with before, but this time they set it against the wild backdrop of the California gold rush. Roddy McDowall, already well regarded to his work in both child acting roles and stage performances, was tapped to play Griffin, giving the movie a curious balance of refined manners and broad physical comedy. Alongside him, Suzanne Pleshette brought her signature charm, cementing her as one of Disney's go-to actresses of the decade. This period in Disney's live-action output really shows a studio caught between eras, still clinging to wholesome adventure stories while beginning to wink at their own absurdity. The result was a hybrid part Western, part Clash of Cultures comedy, and part oddball time capsule of late 60s family filmmaker. Which brings us to The Adventures of Bullwhip Griffin, a family-friendly romp where English propriety collides headfirst with the chaos of the gold rush, wrapped in a title that's almost as over-the-top as the movie itself, so let's dive into the story and see how this oddball adventure unfolds. The film kicks off with a jaunty little tune that immediately feels like the opening of an old-time kids' western show. It's light, playful, and sets the stage for the kind of romp we're about to get. One touch I really appreciate about movies from this era is how they front-loaded the credits. Not only did they roll before the story even started, but they also often told you which actor was playing which role. Something that makes it feel almost like you're being introduced to the cast of a stage play before the curtain rises. The story opens in Boston with an elderly man named Mr. Pemberton visiting a refined woman named Arabella at her elegant home. Meanwhile, we meet Jack in the bedroom, where he's pretending to pan for gold with the enthusiasm of a kid who's read one too many adventure stories. He's buried in a book about prospecting and proudly teaching himself the trade. Their butler, Griffin, enters and notices that Jack's book is titled Bullwhip Brannigan. Ever the voice of reason, Griffin gently scolds Jack and suggests he should stick to the classics instead of what he considers frivolous pulp. It's a funny bit of irony, really, since the whole movie plays out more like one of those pulp adventures than a serious classic. After helping Jack into his suit, Griffin ushers him out with a reminder that the lawyer is waiting. The lawyer is there to oversee the will of Alonzo Flagg, and at first it seems like a very generous send-off. He's supposedly leaving large sums to his staff. Griffin alone is promised $500,000, with the rest going to Arabella and Jack. For a moment, it feels like one of those fairy tale inheritances where everyone lives happily ever after. But then comes the twist. The man was drowning in debt, and everything he owned was tied up with creditors. His assets were set to go straight to the bank, meaning no one in the room was getting a dime. While this revelation unfolds, the camera keeps cutting to a portrait of the deceased. The painting looks perpetually grumpy until the will is revealed as a sham. Then it shifts into a smirk, as if Flagg himself is getting the last laugh. It's a silly gag, but admittedly one of the more entertaining touches in the movie's opening act. The lawyer drives the point home by adding that even the mortgage is past due. Jack runs upstairs and immediately starts packing, as if the solution to sudden financial ruin is simply to hit the road. Griffin notices Arabella laughing, which feels oddly out of place until she admits she can't help it. Griffin, ever the serious one, points out how cruel it is that Flagg left them with no financial stability. Arabella, though, insists that's probably what he wanted, for them to live their own lives instead of relying on his fortune. It's a surprisingly pragmatic view, and one of the few moments where Arabella feels like she's driving the scene. Griffin reminds her that Jack is only 12, but she counters by saying her grandfather went to sea at 11. Arabella isn't afraid of the challenge ahead. She confidently says she'll think of something. She even asks Griffin if he'll take another butler job, to which he sheepishly admits he hasn't given it much thought. It's a nice little character beat showing how Griffin's identity is so tied to the service that he struggles to imagine life outside of it. Suddenly, the housekeeper rushes downstairs in a panic to announce that Jack is gone. He's left behind a dramatic little note declaring that he's off to seek his fortune and will return once he's rich enough to take care of Arabella. It's a kind of bold proclamation only a 12-year-old could make with a straight face. Griffin pieces it together quickly after spotting a newspaper headline and realizes Jack is almost certainly headed for California to chase the gold rush dream. Jack makes his way down to the Boston shipyard and sneaks into a vessel. A mysterious man notices him, follows, and eventually catches up, claiming he's trying to escape people who are chasing him. At the same time, we get a side plot with an auction for a ticket to one of the ships bound for California. The winner is ecstatic, proudly tucking his hard-won ticket into his coat, only to be pickpocketed moments later by a slick bit of sleight of hand. When he finally reaches the ship, of course, the prize ticket has vanished. It's a fun little sequence that mixes tension with some light slapstick and sets the stage for all the misadventures to come on the voyage west. Griffin shows up to warn the captain that he suspects a boy has stowed away on board. The captain, half amused and half annoyed, doesn't buy it but humors him, letting Griffin poke around below deck. Meanwhile, Jack and the mysterious man are sneaking about when Griffin nearly stumbles upon them, forcing them to hide. What makes this bit odd is how Griffin, normally the model of composure, suddenly starts contorting his face in these over-the-top expressions as he searches like he's auditioning for a silent comedy reel. He trails after Jack, only for the strange man to trail him right back and promptly knock him out with a cane. The ship ends up setting sail with Griffin and Jack still on board, much to the captain's irritation, since Griffin had promised they'd be off before departure. As punishment, the captain decides they'll have to earn their keep working on the ship. Griffin politely requests that he be dropped off at the first port, but until then, they're stuck. When they sit down for a meal, both Griffin and Jack recoil at the captain's dreadful cooking. It's so bad that the captain himself nearly gags it down. Griffin, ever the practical one, suggests that for everyone's safety, he should take over kitchen duties. After one more painful bite, the captain relents, essentially admitting defeat to his own cooking skills and promoting Griffin to ship's chef. Back in Boston, Arabella reads a letter from Griffin and Jack that sparks her own decision to head west for California. As she makes this declaration, movers are seen clearing out the family home, which is being repossessed, a visual reminder of just how much she's lost. Still, Arabella keeps her chin up, remarking that her grandfather would be proud of her resolve. Griffin and Jack meet with the captain, who casually mentions they should reach California the very next afternoon. Feeling optimistic, they leave his quarters only to bump into the old man who swiped the ticket earlier. He now insists on being called Judge Higgins, a title that feels as authentic as a $3 bill, considering he literally stole his way aboard. When asked about his plans out west, he waxes poetic about laws, courts, and justice, but it all comes across like a bad audition for a TV courtroom drama. Griffin isn't buying it, muttering that the man is far too eager to be everyone's best friend. Before they can dwell on Higgins' eccentricities, they hear muffled banging from below deck. Following the noise, they stumble upon the mysterious stranger who boarded with Jack, now tied to a chair. At last we learn his name, Bartlett. He explains that someone broke into his cabin, trashed the place, and tied him up while searching for a map he'd been given. As he tells his story, he reveals his real motive. He wants Griffin and Jack to help him track down the treasure the map supposedly leads to. Jack bursts into his and Griffin's room, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement that they're almost in California. He gushes to Griffin about the treasures they'll find, imagining a future where they're filthy rich and Griffin can finally hang up his butler duties. Griffin, however, gently corrects him, saying he's proud of being a butler. It's practically the family trade. Before they can argue further, cries of "Fire!" echo throughout the ship, and the two race out to the deck in alarm. Pandemonium erupts as passengers scramble to abandon ship, everyone bumping into each other in a frenzy. Judge Higgins sidles up to Bartlett and slyly reminds him to grab anything of value before fleeing. When Higgins notices Bartlett reaching for the map, it suddenly clicks that Higgins must have been the one who tied him up earlier. Higgins keeps trying to clobber him, but Bartlett keeps turning around at the worst possible moment, forcing Higgins into a series of awkward excuses. It plays almost like a slapstick. Instead of taking Bartlett out, Higgins ends up bumbling into helping him. Finally, though, Higgins drops the axe, clocks him with his own pistol, and swipes the map for himself. As everyone scrambles to grab hoses, there's a mishap followed by a jarring cut to Griffin laughing, as if he's thoroughly enjoying the chaos of a potential ship fire. Moments later, the tension fizzles out when it's revealed the whole fire scare was a false alarm. The smoke came from oily rags smoldering in the engine room, not an actual blaze. Griffin and Jack rush into Bartlett's room and find him unconscious on the floor. When he comes to, he groggily explains that Higgins was the one who attacked him. Griffin quickly instructs Jack to tend to Bartlett while he hurries off to alert the captain. The captain, clearly rattled, reports that one of his boats has been stolen and is already on its way to shore. Finally, in California, the group wanders through the town, taken to the sights. Jack gets distracted by a dancer on stage, staring a little too long until Griffin covers his eyes like a disappointed parent and ushers him along. They're supposed to be looking for Higgins, who they suspect is headed for the gold mines, but Griffin points out they'll need money in the meantime. Bartlett volunteers his magic act while Griffin decides to put his barbershop skills to use. Before long, a lines of scruffy prospectors form for haircuts. Griffin slyly uses the opportunity to ask if anyone has seen Higgins, but no one has. Ever the opportunist, he charges $10 a cut, then suddenly raises it to $15, only to sheepishly drop back to $10 when the third customer turns out to be bald on top. It's a small but amusing gag that shows off the movie's mix of slapstick and character humor. We then cut to a saloon where a man is tossed out in exaggerated fashion, bouncing across the ground like a rubber ball. He's told bluntly that they don't want his kind inside. This introduces us to the saloon owner Sam and his not-so-bright lackey Mountain Ox. The lackey begs to go for a walk, and the owner reluctantly agrees, though he warns him not to cause trouble. Meanwhile, a couple of men approach Griffin and tell him they spotted Higgins trying to sell his boat, though they can't agree on where he was headed. This sets up the group's next move. Jack and Griffin will travel to Frytown, while Bartlett makes his way to Hangtown. Mountain Ox soon notices Griffin and insists he wants a haircut. Griffin, exhausted from barbering, declares he's done cutting hair. Ox doesn't take no for an answer. He scoops Griffin up and demands service. Griffin snaps at him to keep his vulgar hands off. Jack bravely kicks Ox, and Griffin follows with a punch powered by his weighted glove, flooring the brute to cheers from the crowd. Honestly, this is one of the rare moments where the movie slapstick lands just right. The timing is sharp, the crowd reaction sells it, and you can't help but cheer along. It's goofy, yes, but also one of the few scenes that gives Griffin a real heroic punch the bully payoff. Saloon owner rushes over, worried about his prized strongman. Griffin politely apologizes and hopes Ox isn't too badly hurt. But Jack seizes the moment to rebrand him as Bullwhip Griffin, hyping him up as the man strong enough to wrestle a grizzly. The owner, Sam Trimble, immediately seizes the idea, proposing that Griffin fight Mountain Ox for the bare-knuckle championship. Griffin, however, insists he can't. He's bound for the gold fields. Jack and Griffin head into the mountains and soon discover a group of very stereotypical Mexican bandits, a depiction that definitely hasn't aged well. The leader declares that they're not after anyone's gold, but that the land itself belongs to them. The bandits order everyone out of their carriages, and to Jack and Griffin's amusement, Judge Higgins is among the captives. The robbers start collecting money and jewelry, then demand the coats too, pointing out that gold coins are often hidden there. Higgins makes a dramatic stand, refusing to give up his coat and daring them to shoot him. The leader smugly replies that he makes the rules here and fires a shot at Higgins before laughing and riding away with his men. Griffin presses Higgins about the map, and Higgins reluctantly admits it was sewn into his coat, now stolen. Griffin reasons that they can't continue to the gold without coats or supplies to keep them warm, though Jack protests. Griffin assures him that the bandits probably won't lug the coats very far and may leave them on the trail. Ever the opportunist, Higgins overhears this and decides to follow, hoping to reclaim his precious coat and map. It's an odd sequence, equal parts cliché, casual danger, and plot convenience. The bandits are painted with such broad strokes that they feel more like caricatures than characters, which undercuts the tension and leaves the scene feeling more dated than daring. They eventually recover the coats and discover the map tucked inside. Higgins immediately pops up to confront, insisting he'll be the one to claim it and remarking how oddly their paths keep crossing. Griffin stands his ground, refusing to hand it over, and tells Higgins he'd have to shoot him to get it. Jack, panicked at the thought of Griffin getting killed, reluctantly hands over the jacket. Griffin assures Higgins that their paths will cross again, and at this point you almost roll your eyes at how often the story leans on that coincidence. It's a scene that's tense in theory, but plays more like another convenient way to keep Higgins in the picture. Jack and Griffin arrive at the settlement and start asking around for Higgins. One man dismisses their efforts, pointing out that most of the locals don't even speak English, so they're wasting their breath. Still, he offers a lead. The fellow they're describing sounds less like a judge and more like a dentist he once knew. According to him, this so-called dentist had a reputation for pulling every tooth that had a hint of gold in it. It's a strange little revelation, one that undercuts Higgins' phony respectability and adds another layer of absurdity to his character. The film leans into the gag, but it also makes the story feel more cartoonish than grounded. Jack and Griffin stumble upon Judge Higgins, who is about to be hung out in front of a crowd. Thinking fast, Jack fakes a toothache so they can get close enough to intervene. The townsfolk agree to spare Higgins long enough to deal with the tooth, which buys him some time. Once free, Jack and Griffin press him for the map. Higgins, ever the schemer, says he'll only hand it over if they promise to get him out alive. He tries to stall further by claiming he can't pull the tooth until the swelling goes down, which could take days. Griffin, unimpressed, demands the map first. Higgins finally relents and hands it over, though, conveniently, when he was shot earlier, the bullet had blasted out the end of the trail on the map. It's a contrived twist that feels more like lazy plotting than clever storytelling, leaving you wishing the writers had found a sharper way to keep the chase going. Griffin steps in and pleads with the crowd, arguing that they should spare the dentist's life since he's the only one around to handle toothaches. The townsfolk grudgingly agree, but warn they'll hang him the moment another dentist shows up. To make matters even darker and unintentionally comical, they order Griffin and Jack to start digging his grave in advance. It's a scene that tries for attention but mostly lands on a bizarre, morbid slapstick, making you wonder if the filmmakers were even sure how seriously they wanted you to take it. While digging the grave, Jack casually asks Griffin why he doesn't get married, specifically why not to Arabella. Griffin brushes it off, but it's one of the few moments that hints at a softer side to his otherwise proper demeanor. As they dig, their shovels strike gold, and soon they're cheering as more and more nuggets appear. It's a classic sudden fortune moment that feels almost too easy, but it keeps the story rolling. Back at the settlement, meanwhile, Higgins' luck runs out. The townsfolk prepare to hang him after realizing one of their own can handle tooth pulling. Just as the noose is about to tighten, someone bursts in with the news that Jack and Griffin have struck gold, setting off yet another shift in the story's momentum. We cut back to Arabella, who's still searching for Jack and Griffin and has finally made it to California. The streets are a muddy mess, but the men trip over themselves to make sure she doesn't ruin their shoes, laying down coats and even carrying her across puddles like she's royalty. It's a moment that's equal part chivalrous and over the top, highlighting how the movie leans into its old-fashioned gender roles. One of the men turns out to be Sam, who welcomes her warmly to San Francisco and escorts her into the saloon, promising they'll find her a respectable place to stay. It's a setup that makes you wonder just how respectable a saloon arrangement can really be. Griffin and Jack are on the way back, excitedly talking about the gold they've struck and loudly mention they're hiding them in money belts. Of course, nothing in the movie comes easy, and sure enough, Higgins spots them. He disguises himself as the captain and calls them over, only to hide his face and put on an absurd fake Chinese accent. It's one of those moments that makes you wince, definitely a product of its time and not in a flattering way. As Griffin turns to leave, Higgins seizes Jack and drags him to his cabin, claiming he deserves a cut since they found the gold in his grave. Jack resists, lashing out, and bolts screaming for help. In the scuffle, he tumbles overboard into the water. Griffin leaps in after him, but both struggle to stay afloat with their gold belts weighing them down. It's actually one of the more effective set pieces, showing how greed literally sinks them. At the last second, they ditch their belts and manage to surface. Jack reports to the captain that Higgins tried to rob him, just as Higgins dives overboard to avoid capture. With their fortune gone, Jack blames himself, but Griffin reassures him that they can always hunt for more. Besides, as Griffin dryly notes, at least they didn't lose their trusty scissors. The man tells Griffin and Jack that they can get on the ship headed back to Boston, but since they have no money, their plan is to reopen their barbershop to hustle. Their excitement is short-lived when they spot a sign advertising haircuts for only 50 cents. When they approach the local barber, he bluntly explains that times have changed and the trade isn't worth much anymore. It's a funny little reality check that undercuts their hopes of making easy money again. With the gold gone, there just aren't enough customers to keep them afloat. Jack's stomach growling says he's hungry, but Griffin advises him to think about something else. Jack then hatches a mischievous idea. They should waltz into the fanciest restaurant, eat their fill, and skip out on the bill. Surprisingly, Griffin agrees, but with a flourish of dignity. If they're going to be thrown out, he insists it should be at least from the best place in town. It's a sly bit of character work showing how Griffin manages to cling to his sense of propriety even when plotting something completely improper. As they head inside, Mountain Ox is in the middle of tossing a couple of men out the door. Spotting Griffin, he immediately declares he's been waiting for his rematch. Ox buffs up, ready to fight, and demands Griffin show everyone how he supposedly knocks people out. Just as things are about to explode, Sam steps in, calms Ox down, and warmly greets Griffin. By now, the whole crowd has taken to calling him Bullwhip Griffin, which only eggs Ox on further. He sulks, saying Sam broke his heart by not letting him fight, until Sam slyly points out that there are men willing to pay thousands to see it happen. Sam tempts Griffin with the promise of $2,000 if he accepts. Jack, ever the practical one, pipes up that they can't make such a big decision on an empty stomach, so Sam waves them inside for food first. Inside the saloon, Griffin tries to lecture Jack that this is no place for a boy his age, and certainly not somewhere he should be eyeing the ladies. As they sit down to eat, the dancers introduce the Boston Belle, who to Jack's amazement turns out to be Arabella. He scrambles onto a chair for a better look before shouting her name, and she rushes off stage to embrace him. Arabella admits she actually enjoys singing in the saloon, though Griffin immediately undercuts her, insisting they'll be sailing back to Boston in just 2 days. Sam pops in to tell Arabella she's due for another son, adding to the tug of war between what she wants and what Griffin thinks is proper. Jack then asks how Griffin plans to cover Arabella's passage as well, and Griffin flatly says that Jack and Arabella will be the ones boarding the ship, not him. It's a moment that nicely highlights the push and pull between Griffin's rigid sense of duty and everyone else's desire. After the song, Sam circles back to the fight offer, pressing Griffin for an answer. Griffin, trying to sound practical, asks for a cash advance, and after some back and forth, Sam finally agrees. They shake on it, sealing what feels like a deal with the devil. Jack, ever the realist, nervously asks how Griffin expects to win. After all, he can't rely on the loaded glove trick in a bare-knuckle fight. Sam confidently declares that in 1 week's time it will be Bullwhip Griffin versus Mountain Ox, hyping it like the prize fight of the century. Arabella rushes over, appalled at the whole arrangement. She demands to know what Griffin thinks he's doing and insists she won't touch a cent of what she calls blood money. Griffin, flustered, stiffly replies that Arabella doesn't belong in a place like this, but you can tell he's trying to convince himself as much as her. It's one of those moments where his sense of honor feels less noble and more self-delusion, which makes the scene more interesting than the filmmaker probably intended. Arabella confronts Sam, reminding him how Griffin managed to knock Ox out before begging him to call the fight off. Sam, ever the opportunist, flatly refuses. He explains that they stand to make a fortune on bets since the whole thing was essentially staged from the start. Arabella fires back, threatening to expose the ruse to the crowd herself if he won't stop it. With one final ultimatum, she warns him to figure something out or she'll walk away entirely. It's one of her stronger moments, finally pushing back against all the scheming men around her. Griffin is off practicing his boxing skills while Jack hovers nearby, pointing out just how recklessly this whole plan sounds. Griffin insists he'll combine agility with boxing. After all, he's read a gentleman's guide on the subject. So how hard can it be? Arabella shows up and tells them she's quit the saloon and that they can all sneak aboard a ship before anyone realizes Griffin has bailed. For a moment, it seems like an escape is possible. But Griffin digs in his heels, saying he can't leave because he gave Sam his word. Jack fires back with the obvious question. Wouldn't he rather break his word than break his neck? Griffin half concedes, saying he'll book 2 tickets, but Jack and Arabella refuse to abandon him. As they're heading out, Griffin imagines Sam's face on the punching bag and lets out a haymaker, sending it flying off the rope and into the sky. It's a silly but oddly satisfying gag that underlines how much this fight has gotten under his skin. Arabella finally makes the call. They're staying and they'll see this fight through. Griffin is the one preparing for his fight, bouncing around and trying to sharpen his agility. Jack watches him from the sidelines, admits he doesn't have much faith in Griffin's plan, and jokes that he hopes Mountain Ox will dance instead of fight. Griffin confesses he hasn't quite figured out how to stay out of Ox's way, while Arabella cuts in with some blunt advice. Forget strategy and just focus on surviving. She even suggests that the best bet is to make Ox angry so he loses his temper in the ring. Just then Bartlett shows up and Jack lights up with excitement at the sight of him. Bartlett reveals he struck a little luck himself, having found some gold nuggets, and now he wants to bet big on the fight, hoping to turn Griffin's survival into their payday. We finally arrive at the big fight, with Sam hyping it up as the bout of the year. A bookkeeper is on hand to handle the mountain of bets, and nearly every patron reminds Griffin that their fortunes are tied to his victory. Jack piles on the pressure, telling him Bartlett has wagered all his gold, and to make things worse, that he bet their money too. No pressure at all. Griffin struts into the ring trying to look confident, only for Mountain Ox to make a show of spitting beer right in his face. The bell rings and the fight begins. Griffin politely offers a handshake, but Ox simply hurls him across the ring. When Griffin finally lands a punch, it bounces off Ox like he just tapped a tree trunk. The frustration on Ox's face grows as he keeps missing, while Griffin constantly dodging turns the whole thing into a slapstick routine. Honestly, it's the funniest and most entertaining sequence in this entire film. Eventually, though, Ox manages to land a lucky blow and round one goes to him. Jack, Bartlett, and Arabella scramble to revive Griffin, desperate to keep the crowd from realizing their fighter is out cold. Meanwhile, the camera cuts to the bookkeeper slyly emptying the safe of all the betting money, a little side hustle happening right under everyone's noses. Arabella leans down and kisses Griffin, which magically jolts him awake just in time for round two. This round plays even more like a comedy sketch than a boxing match. Griffin continues dodging while Ox, now half dancing in frustration, looks more like he's auditioning for a musical than throwing punches. Griffin hams it up by pretending to be a matador, complete with Ox charging straight through a bass drum for a big slapstick payoff. The chaos peaks when someone in the crowd joins the chase, sending Ox sliding off his mark. Somehow, against all odds, Bullwhip walks away the winner of round two and the crowd goes wild. Round 3 begins with Ox angrier than ever, but he still can't manage to land a clean hit on Griffin. In frustration, he stomps on Griffin's toe to keep him from running, pinning him under his massive foot. Ox winds up for a knockout punch, but Griffin leans back just far enough that Ox socks him right out of his shoe. Griffin goes flying into the side of the tent, rebounds like a slingshot, and collides with Ox, sending both men sprawling and even launching a few unlucky patrons into the air for extra slapstick effect. They crash to the ground, and the referee starts the 1-minute count. Arabella rushes to Griffin's side, and with a quick lift, he suddenly springs awake. Griffin staggers to his feet just in time, officially winning the fight. The crowd roars, hoisting him up in celebration, while Sam urges that they grab the gold from the safe and make it a quick escape. Sam rushes to the safe only to find it completely empty. Before he can react, the bookkeeper ambushes him, knocking him out and sets the saloon ablaze. When Sam stumbles back outside, he claims the bookkeeper made off with all the gold. Just then, the bookkeeper himself trips and falls, and his horse bolts away with the loot. The crowd gives chase, and Jack suddenly realizes the so-called bookkeeper is none other than Judge Higgins, freshly shaven to disguise himself. Jack yells that the gold is strapped to Higgins' horse, and the mob races after him while the saloon continues burning in the background. Inside, the patrons scramble to empty the saloon. Arabella seizes the moment, declaring herself Ox's new boss and ordering him to tell Paul things out. Jack manages to recover the gold and signals Griffin and Arabella. Sam, desperate, calls on Ox to take the gold, but Ox finally replies that Sam isn't his boss anymore. Arabella tells him to let Sam go, and the scene closes with everyone standing outside silently watching the saloon go up in flames. It's a strangely abrupt ending, leaving the story smoldering alongside the building. In a final, almost comically grand gesture, the film caps things off by revealing that San Francisco has honored Griffin with a statue. It's meant to cement his legend, though it feels more like a tongue-in-cheek epilogue than a genuine triumph. Here's what I think of the movie overall. When it comes to the characters, Jack is the heart of the adventure. Earnest, wide-eyed, and always rushing headfirst into trouble. He's the kind of kid whose optimism drives the story forward, even when his choices make you want to shake some sense into him. Griffin, played with stiff dignity by Robbie McDowell, works best when the film leans into the prim manners colliding with the absurdity around him. He's part mentor, part reluctant adventurer, and part accidental hero, which makes him the most consistently entertaining presence. Arabella, though, given less to do, still has sparks of agency, especially when she challenges both Griffin's stubborn sense of duty and Sam's opportunism. She feels like a character who could have been far stronger if the script gave her more space, but Suzanne Pleshette's charisma keeps her from fading into the background. Judge Higgins is the kind of cartoonish villain who's equal part nuisance and comic relief, a slippery con man whose disguises and fake respectability make him amusing, if not particularly menacing. The plot itself often feels like the string of episode sketches. A shipboard fire scare here, a bandit encounter there, and finally a prize fight that stretches into a full-blown comedy. It's uneven but never dull. The climax in particular, with Griffin stumbling his way through a 3-round brawl against Ox, is easily the highlight. The fight is more vaudeville than boxing, and the movie finally embraces its own silliness in a way that's genuinely entertaining. By the time the burning saloon and the statue reveal rolls around, you can tell the filmmakers weren't aiming for depth, just a playful, chaotic romp, and in that sense, the movie delivers exactly what it promises. For me, that's both the movie's biggest strength and the biggest weakness. It's entertaining enough as a goofy romp, but it never rises above that. The characters are fun, the slapstick lands more often than not, and the climax is generally worth sticking around for. But at the same time, it feels lightweight. A series of sketches strung together without much emotional weight or dramatic payoff. If you go in expecting depth, you won't find it here. But if all you want is a light-hearted frontier comedy with some pratfalls and an English butler widely out of his element, then Bullwhip Griffin hits the mark. And that's it for this frontier comedy. So what did the random picker land on next? Out of over 1,000 Disney-owned titles, it gave me Prom from 2011. From slapstick gold rush antics in the late 60s to a modern teen ensemble dramedy. That's quite the tonal leap, and I'm curious to see how this one holds up. Let's open the vault.